It was a warm evening of the last month of summer. It got dark. A small yard was immersed in the yellow light of old street lamps. Two 15-year-old boys were sitting on a bench near the entrance of a two-story house. Dimka, a skinny black-haired boxer, the conqueror of the hearts of all the local girls, and next to him his best friend Sonia, a fat, blonde boy. Tomorrow the guys had planned a trip to the other side of the city with an overnight stay. During another walk, Max, one of the street friends, offered to spend the night in the basement of an abandoned house. At first the company took the idea negatively. The guys laughed and called Maxim crazy, but he did not stop. "We have a cottage outside the city. Tell your parents that we are going there for a day, and ourselves in the basement. We'll sit and tell stories and then go home in the morning. Or maybe we should really go to the cottage," the red-headed Anya asked lazily. "At least to eat kebab and you can take a beer." "An ideal woman," chuckled Dimka. "Come on, it won't be so scary at the cottage. I wasn't even scared of anything last time at the campfire," answered her sister Masha, fixing her dark strands with her thin fingers. "I'm tired of listening to scary stories in the nature. Sitting there, either mosquitoes are eating or smoke in the face. I'd rather go to the cellar." Masha and Anya were always active, easygoing and surprisingly brave for girls of their age. Sleeping in an abandoned cellar did not frighten them in the least. "And imagine the situation," began Sonia. "We climb down there and there are homeless killers. What will we do? In 6 men will work on the bum." Dimka joked. "There's no one there," said Max. "It's cold in the basement, so no one sleeps there. Oleg and I checked. We'll just have to take some plaids with us so we don't freeze." "What do you think, Oleg?" Dimka asked the frowning boy who was walking next to Max. "Is it worth going?" "It's up to you," he snapped. "I didn't want to have to deal with this later." Oleg was Maxim's half-brother. They were the same age, they grew up together. There was never any special brotherly love between them, but they had all their adventures together. It was said in the yard that Oleg's strict father instructed his son to keep an eye on his restless brother, who was always getting into various awkward situations. Once Maxim set fire to poplar fluff near the recently cut down trees, and suddenly they caught fire. Then Oleg told off his brother as a little one, and took the blame and received an undeserved severe punishment. In their duet, Oleg was the most adequate, serious, and judicious, and Max continued to fall into childhood, playing the role of a jester and balaguer. "And I want to go," Masha smiled. "My father has a big garden lantern. You can put it and sit around it. It will be great." "And how to go there?" Anya asked. "By bus?" "My friend will take us." Max smiled back at her. "By car. We'll take our things and the guys." He looked at Dimka and Sonia. "Take the bus there. I'll tell you the address." Sonia rolled his eyes unhappily. "It's all right," he started. "We'll get there by ourselves, we'll go home by ourselves, and there are no homeless killers there. But what about the other marginalized people? A maniac will come in, or even just a watchman, and in the worst case, the police." "Only us," Dimka shrieked ridiculously. "Maniacs are less feared than the police." "You're at it again, Sonia." "Sanka, look," Max ranted. "There's a large basement. At the entrance there's a huge room, then downstairs a small corridor and 2 more rooms opposite each other. It's all underground. And even if someone comes through the first door, they won't see or hear us. That's it, I'll only go if everyone goes." Sonia crossed his arms on his chest. "It's decided," Dimka nodded. "Doesn't anyone mind?" Everyone was silent. "Then tomorrow night we'll meet near our entrance." The guys walked around a bit more and went their separate ways. In the evening, when Dima and Sonia were sitting near the house, a familiar silhouette of Oleg appeared from the darkness of the yard. He approached the guys and exhaled sadly. "You disappointed me, men." "How so?" Dimka was surprised. "You agreed to another bullshit, that's what you agreed to. Okay, this idiot wants to spend the night there so Anka can see how brave he is." But where are you going? It's a stupid plan, we'll all be there. And Enika will only look at him? Sonia said unhappily. The plan is good, but the strategist is a fool. He's going to scare you. Scare me how? Sanka opened his eyes wide. We'll go into one room, and in the next room he'll leave a phone with an alarm clock. Instead of a melody, it's a scary growl. First he'll warm up everyone with his story about Soulfucker, and then, when the phone growls, he'll go to check it out. And then, Dimka smiled. There will be nothing there. How will he get out of it? You're stupid. It's important to present your courage properly. He'll say there's nothing there, the girls will ask us to leave, and he'll calm down the frightened Enika. And he didn't want to warn us? Sonia was indignant. Or did he send you? Nobody sent me. Oleg took offense. I'm worried. If anything happens to him, my father will skin me. He wants to scare girls. Let him scare, but we men need to know everything in advance. All right, Dimka joined the conversation. We'll play along. The main thing is that if there are any changes in the plan, tell us right away. What if he decides to disguise himself as a maniac and stab Sonia at the same time? Sonia looked at his friend puzzled, and then defiantly rolled his eyes. I'll let you know, Oleg replied, and having said goodbye to his friends, went further down the street towards his house. The next day was spent in packing. Dimka and Sonia stocked up on sandwiches, chips, and sodas. Anya and Masha prepared a lantern, 2 plaids and old scraps of blanket to lay them and sit on the warm one. Oleg and Maxim were going separately. The first took an autumn jacket, so as not to freeze in the basement, a powerful father's flashlight and a folding knife, given by his grandfather on his 15th birthday. The second prepared an alarm clock on his phone for his prank, rehearsed everything once again, and put on the most beautiful t-shirt in the hope of showing off in front of Anya. They gathered at 9 o'clock at the entrance of Dimka and Sanja. They left their backpacks under Oleg's supervision and went towards the bus stop. Vitya, an acquaintance of Max's, agreed to take the rest of the boys to the cellar. He had come with his parents from the village where he had spent all his childhood and had settled in the guy's yard. Load up, he said, opening the trunk of his father's car. A tall, sturdy, low-voiced guy immediately attracted the girls' attention, and Anka was especially interested in him. Seeing this, Max immediately hurried his friends and made sure that Anya was as far away from the competitor as possible in the car. Cherry 7, crowded with teenagers with their camping stuff, started and headed towards the center. It was a short drive, but for Max, the road stretched agonizingly long. He sat uncomfortably in the back seat, and Anka sometimes laughed merrily at Vitya's jokes, which was very annoying. Finally, having seen in the windshield the long-awaited abandoned house at the end of the street, Max ordered to stop and was the first to jump out of the car. Vitya got all the guys' things and even offered to help them carry everything to the downstairs room, but Max resolutely refused. Come tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, Oleg instructed Vitika. Don't be late. He nodded, got into the car, and the 7 began to drive away. Dimka and Sonia came up a couple of minutes later. Well, Max lit a garden lantern and pointed his finger at the steps at the side of the house. That way, and walked briskly forward. The boys picked up their things and followed him slowly. They went down, opened a small iron door and went inside. The basement smelled damp, which the girls didn't like at first, but Maxim was determined and told them a story about how a person gets used to any odor in 11.5 minutes. They did not take him seriously, however. After a while, the odor did indeed cease to be felt. The teenagers walked along the basement. Among the old pipes, they found steps. Oleg turned on his father's flashlight and went down first. The corridor was longer than Dimka and Sonia had imagined. At the end, there were 3 doorways. In 2 of them, opposite each other, there were no doors, and the third, standing directly in the path of the boys, was covered by a massive iron door without a handle. Here to the right, Oleg said and shone his flashlight through the doorway. Max, meanwhile, extinguished the garden lantern, stealthily slipped to the left the phone with the alarm clock and quickly returned to everyone. The boys turned and entered the room. Anya and Masha spread blankets on two thick pipes that were close to the floor, and Dimka and Sonya took out chips and soda, took their seats at once and got ready for an unforgettable one-actor play performed by Maxim. "Come on, sit down," he muttered, setting the garden lantern between the shards of tile on the floor. The room was filled with a pleasantly dim light. "When will you start?" Oleg asked in a whisper. "In an hour it will roar." His brother smiled at him. The guys sat down. Max finally got his way and sat down next to Anya. "Who will start?" Sonya asked. "Let me do it," Dimka volunteered. The story is called The Black Car. Once a black car came to our yard. Nobody knew whose car it was, or if there was anyone inside, because the windows were also black. And then, on a dark night, the window rolled down and a white glow appeared from the interior. The boy Lyosha went up to it. Dima paused for a moment, looked in, and Dimka made a scary face and shrieked loudly. The girls squealed with fright, and the boys laughed. "Jerk," said Masha, offended. "Why so frightening?" "My girl," Dimka smiled. "You knew what you were doing." "It's an old joke. Any fool in our yard knows it. And we don't know it because we're not fools," Anka supported her sister. "Listen to a normal story. My grandmother told it to me. When she was young, she worked on a farm where wheat was brought. She and her partner had to pour the grain into a big machine that ground it into flour. And her partner was beautiful, so beautiful that all the men ran after her. And so they poured out the grain with grandmother. The machine is working at full speed. The grain is grinding, and as luck would have it, two men came to them to talk, well, and to look at her partner. They were standing there, talking, quarreled over something, and started fighting. They didn't notice how they pushed their partner. She fell into the machine and was crushed there. The flour turned red, but they didn't throw away this mess. The case was hushed up. The men were taken away somewhere, and the grandmother signed a non-disclosure form. They baked bread from this flour and fed it to the shift at the farm. The next day, nobody came back from the shift. Everyone got sick, and half of them never recovered. "It's no big deal," Sonya shook his head. "It's a pointless story. What sense do you want in a scary story?" Max interceded. "A scary story should intrigue and evoke emotions. That's the point. Sana needs a moral," said Dimka cheerfully. "To have a philosophy at the end." Sonya waved him away. "Wait a minute," said Anya angrily. "It's not the end yet. 20 years have passed since then. The farm was closed, and people still hear at night, as if the machine is working, and the girl screams. Maybe it's a short circuit, so the machine turns on by itself," Dimka suggested. "What machine?" "It was taken away for utilization right after the farm was closed," explained Anka. "A friend of my grandfather said that he went there at night and saw something. He doesn't remember exactly, but he turned gray overnight. He said that if you heard crying at night, you should shout that you had not eaten any bread and run away from there." "That's a good story," Maxim smiled. "And I'll tell you what I'll tell you. It's called Dushekhleb. We lived in another town then. There were 3 sisters in the yard. The eldest went missing when I was still a baby, and with the other 2 twins, we spent all our childhood together. Until one incident." "What incident?" Anya asked, interested also. Maxim continued with an expression, noticing the genuine interest on Anka's face. "They were sorting through some old things left by Nastia's older sister. They found a 48-sheet notebook. Nastia wrote down in it how to perform different rituals, to summon spirits, monsters. We knew them all. The Queen of Spades, the Bloody Mary, and the hedgehog who runs and swears, but there was one unknown. On the last scribbled page was the word Soulslayer written out and underlined. followed by the items for the ritual and instructions on how to get to it. I don't remember exactly, but it seemed to require pebbles, a drop of blood, not from a finger, but from the stomach, and a bunch of other things. We thought that since he was last on the list, it was after meeting him that Nastya disappeared. I said that I didn't believe it because it was creepy, and the twins went crazy and decided to go to this Dushekhleb and find out what he had done to their sister. They talked me into it, so they decided to do it. But we were 9 years old then, we were driven home early, and according to the rules, the ritual had to be performed at night. We agreed to meet on the corner of my house at 11 o'clock at night. The twins somehow managed to escape, but I couldn't. I could only look out the window. They were upset, of course, but they didn't cancel the ritual, and on the contrary, they decided to hold it right under my balcony. To be honest, I got cold feet and didn't look at them, but only listened through the open window. First they were saying something, then they were reading some spell or something, and then they suddenly fell silent. I sat for a while, and then I went into my room, and that was it. I didn't even dare to look out. And then Anya asked impatiently, "I don't know, we never saw each other again." Max shrugged. "They disappeared too, as far as I know. The only thing that scares me is that the notebook is nowhere to be found. And who knows how many more victims it will bring. The guys have gone quiet. Is there anything about this monster on the internet?" Dimka asked incredulously. "Nasty things." Oleg intervened in the conversation. "Not that sect or some ancient faith." "Oh, Oleg, tell me something." Masha smiled. The guy thought about it. "There is a story," he began. "Before my father married for the second time, we lived in the village near the railroad. And everyone in the neighborhood knew about Uncle Nikolai. One boy, Koka, for years older than me, had grown in body, but in mind he was still a 6-year-old. He didn't know how to do anything, he whimpered all the time. He kept saying, 'Uncle, Uncle.' So they nicknamed him Nikolai in the manner of Uncle Fyodor. When I grew up, I asked my father why this boy was so strange, and I found out that when he was a child, out of the blue he woke up in the middle of the night and screamed, even tore his voice. The whole house ran to him, and Koka sat on the bed, wet himself with fear, pointed his finger at the window and wailed, 'Uncle, Uncle.' They thought he had a terrible dream or was afraid of a shadow, so they took him for treatment, but it was useless. Since then, his brains have been frozen. Neither doctors nor witch doctors helped him. But that's not the worst." Oleg made his voice lower. "Uncle was found." Goosebumps ran down the guys' backs. Oleg continued. "At night, Petty, a participant, was walking from the birthday of a comrade and noticed how from the garden of a grandmother over the fence climbs some silhouette over the fence. And our neighborhood is quiet, no bandits or thieves. The policeman thought that it was some teenager playing around, stealing apples or apricots, called him, but he jumped down, growled with anger and fought. Petty tried to hold him, but he couldn't. He told me later that the villain's clothes were slimy and his skin smelled of dead fish. It didn't work, the silhouette threw his bag and ran away. Petty brought it to the station, began to disassemble it, and there's a video camera and a bunch of small discs inside. He put the first disc into the computer, started to watch it, and almost fell off his chair from horror. A boy was sleeping on the tape, the nightlight was shining on his face, and Petty recognized our Uncle Nikolai. The zoom was getting farther away. It became clear that they were filming through the window. Suddenly the boy opened his eyes, stood up, opened his mouth and squealed. The cameraman laughed, and his laugh was so ugly, hoarse, as if inhuman. Then the picture jerked and the video ended. Petty grabbed the box from under the disc, and on it was written in blue marker, "Kalenka." He looked through the other tapes and found all the children in the village, even me. I was diving from the bridge on the pond while the cameraman was sitting in the bushes. "That's scary," Masha grumbled. "I had a similar story, listen." She didn't finish. She was interrupted by a muffled, creepy laughter from the corridor. That's how mentally unhealthy adults usually laugh. The guys froze in horror. I thought it would growl, Sonya whispered in Dimka's ear. Me too, shrugged his shoulders and replied. Did you hear that? Is anyone going to go and check? Oleg asked calmly, shifting his gaze to Max, but he was sitting pale and looking at his wristwatch with wild horror. What are you doing, Maxim? Oleg, he said quietly and looked at his brother with eyes huge with cold fear. This is not my alarm clock. Oleg's chest echoed the painful feeling that he had so often felt when his father used to belt him for misdemeanors. A feeling of doom, of knowing that there was no way out, and the only way to overcome the pain was to let it go and accept his fate. Passed after a couple of seconds, the brain turned on, and Oleg began to analyze the situation. His head was spinning. His hands were shaking. The situation was so terrible that the guy wanted to burst into bitter tears, but he kept himself in control. Masha covered herself with a plaid and began to read a prayer. Anya just trembled and grabbed Max's hand. The same sat motionless and again looked at the clock. With shaking hands, Oleg grabbed his father's flashlight and directed the beam toward the doorway. The light ran along the wall and covered part of the corridor. The boy gazed into the darkness, trying to discern the source of the sinister laughter. Seeing a maniac would not be as frightening to him as not seeing anything. What are you? Dimka became wary. Is everything all right? Dima, it's not according to the plan, Oleg answered in a trembling voice. What does it mean? Sonya jumped to attention. Are you kidding? There was a metallic clanking sound, and the guys almost synchronously turned their heads towards the exit. The iron door without a handle began to open slowly. They're going to lock us in now, shouted Anya. It's a maniac. How will they lock us up? Sanja nervously reasoned. These are different passages. He pointed at the door with a shaking hand. Dimka, Oleg, they won't lock us up, will they? Tell me. We need to leave. Let's run to the exit before it's too late. Oleg commanded in a bass voice and, clutching the lantern tightly in his hand, jumped down from his seat. I have a knife. Come here. Dimka grabbed Masha's hand and led the way. Sonya stood behind them, knocking over the garden lantern, which instantly went out. Oleg's loud bass brought Max out of his stupor, and he stood beside his brother, clutching tightly the hand of the bewildered Anya. I'll go behind. I'll cut him if I have to, Oleg said and handed the flashlight to Dima. Run upstairs, I'll catch up. And the lantern, Dima exclaimed. It will be dark for you. I have, Oleg reassured and showed a small gray flashlight on a keychain. Hurry up and run, Dimka nodded. The boys ran out of the room. Oleg stayed a little longer near the iron door and shone his flashlight into the opening, which opened up in front of him more and more. The heart-rending scream of a frightened teenager rang through the long underground corridor. Maxim looked around. It was pitch black. Even the light from Oleg's small flashlight was gone. Tears came to his brother's eyes. The boys rushed up the stairs, and it was only a little while before they reached the salvation door. Finally, the beam of the flashlight hit the small cellar door and began to spread quickly along the wall, illuminating dried blood stains on the walls, which the guys had not noticed when they walked here in the dim light of the garden lantern. Dima kicked at the door. It was locked. Repeated attempts to open it failed. The teenager caught the frightened glances of the boys. Mocking loud laughter slowly approached. The boys sat down on the floor and cried. The laughter came up to them, louder and louder, growing into a horrible cacophony of moans, screams and blood-curdling, painful laughter. Dimka gathered courage and pointed the flashlight at the source of the sound. The laughter sounded in unison with the boys' chilling death scream. Everyone realized that in the basement of the abandoned house hid not a maniac. Vitya arrived at the house at 10 in the morning. The guys were not there. The boy went down to the basement door, pulled it, but it was locked. He knocked silence. Vitya shrugged his shoulders, stood for a while and left. After a long time of searching, inconsolable parents will lose hope, and announcements about the disappearance of 6 15-year-old teenagers will fall off the pages of newspapers.